And so now we're going to switch to our next general session. It's called Hourani Wheat, Ancient Grain, Modern Uses, and I am very pleased to introduce Elizabeth DeRuff, who is a farmer and founder of Honore Farm and Mill in Marin County here in California, and my colleague, the CIA's own Ryan Luttrell, who is a lecturing instructor at our Greystone campus. So please welcome them.
Thank you so much. Oh, is that muted? Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much for welcoming me here today. So I remember the first time that changed the way that I thought about wheat. It was 25 years ago at an Episcopal retreat center in Healdsburg, California. It was a week-long summer family camp, and I was the chaplain, and people would come from all over the camp. Ooh. Getting the kinks out. Is it good? It's good. Okay. So back to Healdsburg, California. We're at a family camp. And people came from all over, all ages, and each morning the church bell would clang, and people would come dressed however they were. Children that were barefoot in swimsuits would come into the chapel, and at the front of the chapel was a simple wooden altar, and on top of the altar was a beautiful loaf of bread. And after singing prayers to bless the bread, I walked amongst the adults and children, tearing off pieces of this bread and handing it to them in their cupped hands, until I came to a woman who, instead of cupping her hands, she leaned toward me and she said, "I can't eat it. I'm allergic to bread." Her words shocked me. Allergic to bread, I thought? That's like being allergic to air. And this was 25 years ago. No one had ever heard the words gluten-free before. So that moment was very influential in my life because I come from a long farming family from the Midwest. Both my parents are from the Midwest and had family farms. And my great-grandfather, Charles Hoffman, was actually a wheat farmer. And he was studying to become a lawyer and then ultimately a judge. And I grew up with these stories of him propping his law books up on the plow, steering wheel, and doing his work while studying for law. So wheat was really part of my family. I thought, wheat is wholesome, it's good, it's delicious. I knew wheat, or at least I thought I did. And then in the decades since that day at family camp, since then to today, the gluten-free industry is now a $22 billion industry. So something is happening to wheat, and people are responding to it differently. So what was happening to wheat was such a mystery to me until the year 2010, when I went also to Healdsburg, California, to a farm called Front Porch Farm. And there I met the owner and farmer, Peter Buckley. And Peter said, "I'm growing a new crop." And I was interested to hear what he was doing. And he said, "Well, actually, it's not new, it's ancient. It's heirloom wheat, and it's called Red Fife." I had never heard of Red Fife or of heirloom wheat before. I always thought wheat was wheat and flour was flour. So I was trying to reconcile what he was saying with what I had always knew, what I thought I knew. And so I started taking university classes. I started attending conferences around the country to educate myself. And what I have learned is that not all wheat is the same. and that some wheat is more digestible than other wheats. I've also come to appreciate that human-altered wheat that is ultra-processed and baked with additives like dough conditioners is not good for our health or the health of the earth. So here's an interesting fact. There are 150,000 varieties of wheat, mostly in seed banks around the world. Each one has a different flavor profile, different baking characteristics, and different agricultural requirements. Some grow well in cold climates where there's snow. Others grow well in arid climates where it's quite hot. So discovering these heirloom grains has really showed me this new way of reconnecting to the land, because they all have specific names and they're from specific places. And this has become my life's work and the mission of my nonprofit, Honoré Farm and Mill, which is named after the patron saint of bread bakers. I'm sure you all know, Saint Honoré. And so we are reconnecting people with the land, bringing people onto the farms, teaching them how their bread is is farmed and milled and baked. So also on my quest to understand and to learn about heirloom wheat, I went to a famous place in my world called the Bread Lab, and it's at Washington State University. And there I met a man named Steve Lyon, who is the chief wheat breeder and farmer. Every year, the Bread Lab would have an annual conference, and I would go to those conferences, and in the afternoons when there was free time, Steve and I would walk through his fields, and he had 1,000 different varieties growing at that time, and he would tell me about all the different varieties and what he was learning about each one. So meeting me gave Steve an idea. And later he told me it was really my passion and dedication and my spiritual roots that caused him to reach out to the USDA Seed Bank and request a very rare variety of wheat. So seed banks will only release 5 grams of seed at a time, which in wheat is about 40 seeds. So Steve got those seeds, and in his greenhouse, he planted them and then harvested them over the course of 2 years without my knowledge at all. So you can imagine I was completely surprised when a box from the Bread Lab arrived on my desk, and in it was a handful of seeds from a variety I had never heard of before. And the variety was called Hourani. It's named after the Hauran Plateau between northern Jordan and southern Syria. So we started growing this heirloom wheat. We worked with volunteers and we started hand planting it and hand harvesting it. It's the only way you can do it with a handful of seeds when you're starting with that little. And over the course of the last 6 years, we have gone from a handful of seeds to 80,000 pounds. And Hourani is unlike any of the other wheats that I have grown, which is Red Fife and Sonora, Corazon, Caroon, a number of different varieties. Hourani is just such a standout. I love this photo because it has this like bluish green hue at this point in its maturation cycle before it becomes golden. It's incredibly high yielding. The year that we went from 100 pounds, we put 100 pounds on 1 acre, we harvested that year 3,200 pounds. And the farmer and I that were farming that together wept. It was very unusual for something called a landrace or an heirloom wheat to yield that high. So it also grows without irrigation here in Northern California. We plant it in November and we harvest it in June or July with no irrigation for the last 5 years. So also Hourani wheat is a durum wheat, which makes it more digestible than common wheat. Common wheat has 6 sets of chromosomes. Hourani has 3 sets of chromosomes. It's a durum, so it's easier to digest. And we also stone mill all of our flour. And that makes a tremendous difference on digestibility as well. Commercially, most whole wheat flour has actually been processed through something called a roller mill. It takes the seed and it divides it into 3 parts, and it discards most of the germ and the bran and takes what's left and calls it whole grain. And that actually is harder for our bodies to digest without the B vitamins that are in, and the omega-3 fatty acids that are in the germ. So whole grain flour really only has to be 51% whole grain to be called whole grain flour if you're buying it commercially. Honoré Farm and Mill, Stone mills all of our grain. So a pound of wheat goes in the hopper in the top, and a pound of flour comes out. Nothing is lost and nothing is discarded. So let's see. So, most interesting to you, I think, as chefs here gathered at the World of Flavor conference is, how does it taste? Several years ago, I was invited to go and share what we were learning about wheat to the chef de cuisine at the French Laundry. And at the morning of my visit, I baked off a sourdough boule from Hourani wheat. And I arrived at the French Laundry, and I was warmly welcomed by then chef de cuisine David Breeden. And he walked me through their kitchen, which is more pristine than most living rooms. And we walked to a high wooden table, and I unwrapped the wax cord, and I opened up the parchment paper to show the proud boule. And his staff started to come around. And I said, have you heard of Hourani wheat before? Nope, no one had heard of it. I said, it's from the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent. I also brought a bag of Hourani flour. And Chef took that bag and he poured it into a bowl. And he brought the bowl up to his nose and he smelled it. And then he took it down. And then here's a picture of him tasting the flour. And when I asked him why he was tasting the flour, he said, I want to understand and experience the raw ingredient on its own. So next, he took the loaf of bread and expertly cut it across the score mark, turning the cut side down for a stable surface to cut through and make slices of bread. And he took one of those pieces and he brought that to his nose and smelled deeply. And then he pulled it away and he looked at the soft, slightly shiny crust. And finally, he took a bite. And he chewed. And if any of you have been to the French Laundry, you know they do not rush things. A meal there can last for hours. And he stood there for a long time tasting the bread. And as Chef was tasting the bread, as well as his staff, I thought of the story of Hourani and why Steve Lyon wanted me to farm it. Hourani wheat it was found and stored at Masada. Masada is a mountain fortress in the middle of the Judean desert built by King Herod the Great in the year 70 BCE. In the year 73, the Romans were persecuting the Judean inhabitants of the Masada fortress. And on the night before the Romans were going to capture, torture, and enslave the inhabitants, instead, they decided to take their own lives. And at that time, there was a historian by the name of Josephus. And he wrote that before they took their own lives, they burned the storehouse that had all of their food in it. And Josephus records it, and he says there was wine and oil in abundance. There were dates and pulses in heaps, and there was wheat of plenty. So fast forward 2,000 years later, when there was an archaeological dig of Masada, the archaeologist Yadal Yadin found exactly what Josephus wrote: wine, oil, dates, wheat of plenty. And when the modern scientists DNA tested the wheat, they learned it was Hourani, the exact variety that we are growing today. So finally, Chef David Breeden spoke, and he said, "Is there butter in this dough?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Is there oil?" And I said, "No, just flour, water, salt, levain." And he chewed, and we stood there with this group, and it was like a breaking of the bread, a communion, and this reverence for this food was so shared and palatable then. And finally, he said, "From now on, at the French Laundry, we will be using Hourani flour to bake our bread." And this is some of the rolls that they make, that they actually call Genesis rolls because they take 7 days to bake. But it's not just Michelin star restaurants that are working with Hourani now. We are working with pasta makers, we're working with brewers, and also there's some local school districts that are purchasing Hourani flour and baking 100% whole grain pancakes and muffins and quick breads for their students. Because really, wheat was always meant to sustain life for rich and poor alike. And I pray that someday we will all be nourished by 100% whole grain organic flour. And I really think that we are at a renaissance for wheat. We're starting to see the names of different varieties on different products. And I believe that those of you in this room as chefs, hearing this story will be the ones to lead the way. And I thank you. Yeah.
Hello all. Thank you for being here and hearing this wonderful story of Hourani and just being part of this community of ancient grain and growing this. I'm here to talk to you today about a student club that I started at our Greystone campus called the Grain Gang, right? And so give you a little background of how we actually started this is it started in my own kitchen at home. I started studying for a baking certification about a year ago. I started baking a lot at home. And I have young children at home. I have a 3, a 5, and a 7-year-old, and they wanted to learn how to bake bread with me. This is my 2 sons and my daughter here, learning how to make challah bread, and learning how to do all these things, right? I found that just because of their inquisitive nature and their age, they started asking me lots of questions. And I feel like these were questions that, as a CIA chef, I probably should have known the answer to, but I didn't. And I find them to be some of the most important questions that we are faced with now as chefs, right? So these questions were, where does our flour come from? How does it get milled? Who mills it? Who grows it? Right? And so these are all really, really important questions that we search for every day, right? So I explained to them how flour was made. We bought this little KitchenAid grinder. We started grinding our own flour, right? And I thought that would sort of pacify them for a little bit, but it didn't. They wanted to know more and more. So their next questions were, can you take us to some wheat fields? And I'm like, I guess, where do we, Kansas? I don't know where wheat's grown. Do they grow wheat in California? And so I live in Petaluma. I just simply Googled Petaluma wheat fields, and I stumbled upon this website of this 2,000-year-old grain called Hourani that was grown by Honoré Farm and Mill. And so I reached out to Elizabeth and said, I'm with the CIA and I'd love to volunteer and I'm a baker and all these things. I never mentioned my kids. And then she said, sure, come on out, right? And when I came out, I brought my 2 sons with me, my 5 and my 7-year-old. And all of a sudden, we were on our hands and knees pulling weeds in this field as we were meeting Hourani for the first time, right? We were feeling what wheat felt like in our hands and what this journey starts with to ultimately become flour, right? So this led me to go back to work. And all I could talk about was wheat and farming and regenerative farming and the land and all of these things that were just sort of bringing this passion out of me that I didn't really know I had, right? And so I was then met with more questions from students. Can we go? What is regenerative farming? Can we field the wheat ourselves, right? And so I started bringing them out with us. I started having them tend to these fields. And Elizabeth didn't mention this fully, but since this is an ancient grain and it's such a precious thing that we hold, we hand plant it, hand tend to it, and ultimately hand harvest this crop, right? We're really feeling the journey of this food all along the way, right? So this is the initial grain gang that I took out there, and this is us working in these fields. You can see just in the pictures how when I first brought my sons out, it was coming up to their knees, and by this point, it's up almost to our waist here, right? So it's really, really growing along, right? Here's some more examples of us just out in the field, and we're going through this journey of learning about farming and where our food comes from, right? We started learning about regenerative farming, which is renewing the land's natural resources, right? We learned about the process of dry irrigation that Elizabeth talked about. We learned about carbon health, pH level of soil, all of these things that have become such important factors in the way that food is grown today. We ultimately took this flour, wheat berries, back to the CIA with us, and we began to play, right? We started making baguettes and bowls and pizza dough and cookies and anything that you could think of, right? And we couldn't believe the flavor. We couldn't believe that we were eating whole grain and what we were getting of these products that we had been making with simple white flours for weeks, right? We were astonished to learn things like that this Hourani has a full spectrum of B vitamins. It has omega-3 fatty acid. It's higher in protein, higher in fiber, right? So it's a good product for us as well, right? As we continued to play, we began learning more and more, right? We got more into the soil growth, the terroir of where this wheat grows. We started experimenting against other flours and could tell right in front of us the flavor difference, the rise difference, all of these things. During these tests, we learned about fractionating flour, which is the process of when they go through mills and they separate the bran, which is the outer shell, the germ, which is sort of the embryo, and the endosperm. Typically, the endosperm is about 70%, and it's where white flour comes from. And we learned that large milling companies separate these out, right? They will take the bran and the germ, separate them, and then grind that 70% endosperm down and get as much white flour as they need. And then in the end, they will mix it back together in a process called reconstitution and call that whole wheat flour. But something is lost in that process. Something is not lining up that is different when you run flour straight through a mill and get 100%. And we learned this through our sourdough starter. We had been feeding our sourdough starter, and we're noticing that if we would feed it, a really reputable brand of flour, that our starter would double in the course of 8 hours. But when we fresh milled Hourani and fed it, it quadrupled in 2 hours. And so we began thinking, what is this doing to our body? What are we missing, right? I started talking to bakers, and they talked about the nutrient levels that were lost by reconstituting, fractioning, and just sitting on a shelf in a grocery store, right? We started learning that 40% of this is lost in the first 24 hours, and up to 90% of the nutrients are lost, right? Bakers I was speaking to were calling this dead flour, the flour that's on the shelf, right? So from here, after we learned about sort of what's in this flour and the healthy benefits, the taste and all of this, we started experimenting even further, right? So Elizabeth gave us a project. One of their honorees' main objectives is to really help elementary schools and turn the way that dining is going. So she tossed us a project and said, we're trying to make a cheese cracker, like a Cheez-It, if you will, right? And we can develop this recipe, give it to schools that do scratch baking, which there's more than you would think, and they can begin making this as a healthy alternative snack for children in elementary school, right? So we took this on. We didn't have any idea how to do research and development, honestly, but we went in and we just started taking a whiteboard. We would put a recipe down, and we would just change a few factors each time. 1 or 2 more ounces of salt, olive oil, butter, all these things. And we would hand it over to Elizabeth, and her board would go through it. They would give us feedback. And after 5 or 6 bake shop days of doing this, we developed a product that is using Hourani. It's healthy. It's a healthy snack alternative for elementary school children. And it's also a viable product that they can sell as a nonprofit, right? So really worthwhile research and development projects coming out of this. We also got to share the things that we began to learn about farming. And one of these is how climate change has affected wheat, right? So we have seen a process come through with climate change where specifically in the year 2022, 37% of the wheat crop was lost in the wheat belt of our country, which is the Dakotas and Kansas and that sort of area, right? And this was attributed to really a monoculture of wheat, planting just one kind of wheat that has been crossbred for production, and pests coming in that were not allowed to be there because of weather before, droughts, floods, all sorts of impacts from climate change, right? So what we learned is that starting in Washington with Steve Lyons, the same person at the Washington State Bread Lab, they developed a theory to fight this sort of change in dynamic, right? They said the weather is chaotic. We're going to fight it with chaos with wheat. Instead of planting a mono crop, we're going to plant 15 to 20 different kinds of wheat together. And then we're going to grind them all up and call them climate blend flour, right? This was incredibly impactful. It worked, right? They began getting 100% out of all of their fields. They began to battle the things like the pests. The pests may eat one type of wheat, but as they would go to the second type, they're like, I'm out of here, right? So we began to learn this story of wheat and climate change and regenerative farming practices, and we began to share it with as many people who would listen to us. Then it came back around, and we had been tending these fields for weeks and weeks, and we'd seen this wheat grow, and we'd seen it turn from green to that aquamarine color that Elizabeth shared, to this wonderful golden waves, right? And on July 26th, we got the opportunity to go out and hand harvest this wheat, to cut down the product that we had seen and tended to for months and months. I can't tell you what an exciting day that was, right? All of our students were just smiling. I always made the comment that I would see smiles on their faces that I honestly just really wouldn't see while they were at school. They were sort of frowning and acting like they're made to be there. But then all of a sudden, we're taking these children that have been sort of helicopter piloted and told that outside is bad and all these things, and they're just smiles all over their face as they're working in these fields. So we had the honor of participating in this along with about 120 other volunteers. Honore is a heavily volunteer-based organization as a nonprofit, right? The other thing that we got to do on this day, aside from harvesting this glorious wheat, is we got to share our culinary skills with the people working that day. So my group, the Grain Gang, cooked lunch that day, utilizing product from the previous year's harvest. We made wheat berry salads. We made pizzas, breads, lavash crackers, pasta. We made so many things utilizing this, right? In a plant-forward vegetarian day, eating in the fields, supplying people, right? This really felt like community building to us. We had really seen the full circle come around, and we're now using this crop to feed a multitude of people and also gaining on our own culinary skills and showing catering, all these sorts of things, right? So this is our group that day that was cooking, the Grain Gang. And I think the comment that I heard the most from our students along this journey is that we will never look at flour the same way again, right? You come to CIA and you're just taking a scoop and sticking it into a bin and pulling out flour. And that has completely changed for these students now, right? They know about the value of flour, both physically for our own bodies, monetarily, and for our community, and they know where their flour comes from, right? We've answered some of these questions. So what's next for us at the Grain Gang? Well, we've got a lot of projects working, right? So the first one I mentioned about fractionating flour, separating it out, reconstituting it, we're doing a huge academic research project on that now. We're figuring exactly how this process is done, what factors affect it, and how we can get an answer. Because all the bakers I talk to, I would ask, why is it better to do this? And they would say, I don't know, it's just better. And so we said, we're going to figure out the why. So we're figuring out what are the benefits of fractionating versus not fractionating. We're also heavily working with Menus of Change, University Research Collaborative, and trying to bring the education of regenerative farming practices, buying local, eating in season, and sharing these with 83 different universities around the country that are participating. We're also participating in Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives, where we pair together with medical professionals and Harvard University to educate how ancient grains can be used as really food as medicine, right? And the last thing we're really working on is we're planting our own wheat field at the CIA. We have been working with the California Wheat Commission, and they have given us 4 distinct different varieties. One is the red fife that Elizabeth mentioned earlier. And we're going to plant it across the street, and we're going to tend to it, and we're going to watch it grow. We're also going to keep going back out to Elizabeth, and we're going to keep on learning, and we're going to keep on answering these questions as they come up. So that's Hourani. I hope you enjoyed this story that we were able to tell you today. I hope you're able to try it at the marketplace tomorrow, and Elizabeth and I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
So thanks again to Elizabeth DeRuff and Ryan Luttrell. As Ryan mentioned, they'll both be in the marketplace tomorrow, Friday's marketplace, and joined by Nick Gislason from Hanabi Lager Company, which is a company here, a beer company here in Napa Valley. Grain forward, working with ancient grains in their brewing and connecting to California farmers. And they will be sampling out their Hourani Pilsner. And I will say it was like a month ago, in September in Sacramento, Ryan and some other colleagues of mine had an opportunity to speak at Terra Madre Americas in Sacramento. And Nick was there sampling out their Hourani Pilsner, and it's just such a lovely, the Hourani gives it like a little bit of, there's like a soft, buttery flavor to it. So he's going to come tomorrow. They'll all be together. You'll get to sample Hourani in a couple of different ways. You'll get to touch the wheat, see it. So we're very excited about that. And then now we are going to head to our World Marketplace tasting and lunch, and it will be on the first and second floors. Jody Eddy and Rose Previtt will be signing their books, and then we also will have some entertainment. We have Philip Lawrence Mandolin, who is a solo mandolin player specializing in Italian melodies. And then we're going to head back here in Ecolab at 2 p.m. for a general session 6, where we'll welcome grains and cultures, bulgur and yogurt across Anatolia with Worlds of Flavor fan favorite Musa Dogdriven and probably one of the nicest chefs you'll ever meet, and Melik Erdal, hosted by writer Liz Grossman. So thank you.
Welcome to Peanuts in the Plant Forward Kitchen. I'm Ashton Pelham. Today we're digging into the roots of peanuts, where they come from, how they're grown, and why they're good for the planet. I'm joined today by the incredible chef Mai Pham, internationally celebrated chef whose dishes are inspired by the bold flavors of Southeast Asia. And we're also lucky to have Mason Becker, a peanut farmer from Texas who's helping lead the change in sustainable agriculture. So Mason, we'll start with you. So many people want to know more about where their food actually comes from. Can you share what makes growing peanuts so unique and how they stand out as a sustainable crop?
You know, when I think sustainability, it brings back something my dad always told me, is being a steward of the land and a steward of the soil. And peanuts tie in perfectly with that. If I can show you a peanut that I got to bring all the way from my home in Texas, you can see obviously the beautiful peanuts that we all know and love, right? But what a lot of people don't realize is peanuts are actually a legume. So they grow underground and they have the ability to put nitrogen back in the soil. So not only do we get a commodity that we can all eat and enjoy, but we can also take this plant, all the leaf material and the roots that store up that nitrogen, and we can either put it back into the soil for the next year's crop, or we can bale it up and use it as a hay to feed cattle and other ruminants.
Wow, that's eye-opening. I already love peanuts, but knowing they're good for the environment makes them even better. Now, Chef Mai, your cooking draws on flavors from all over the world. How have peanuts shown up in your culinary journey, and what delicious dish are you sharing with us today?
So today we're going to do a dish called gà kho sa đậu phộng, clay pot braised chicken with peanuts. One thing to know about Vietnamese cooking, clay pot is very important, and it's because that's the cooking vessel of choice. It's inexpensive, it's very easy, and it also imparts flavor to the food. So we're going to start by making the caramel sauce first, right? So all it calls for, I got a pan that hopefully is hot enough, and this is just sugar. Don't panic, it's doing its thing, right? It's getting really beautiful caramel, like almost butterscotch right now. And you notice I'm lifting it off from the fire because I don't want it to continue to burn out of control. And I'm going to put a little bit of hot water in there. And over here, it'll splatter. So we just want to be very careful with it. And that's all you need to do.
Oh, wow.
So the next thing to do is more straightforward. It's cooking off the chicken. This is the oil. You're going to put some oil in. So I've got some nice shallots. Now it's nice and hot, right? And you notice I'm kind of want to give it a little bit of a head start. If you put everything in here, the garlic stuff usually burns too quickly.
Okay.
And I want to extract some of the flavors from the shallot. I'm going to add the chicken. And normally what you do is you put a little fish sauce in. You could just put a little bit in. And that's sort of the key. At this point, we're going to put in the caramel sauce. So what we're going to do now is add a little bit of coconut water, or you can use water, or you can use chicken stock, right?
Okay.
At this point, we already got the nice seared smell with the lemongrass in right now, right?
Okay.
Lower the temperature here. We're going to let this simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes.
So Mason, as a third-generation farmer, what keeps you passionate about the work that you do? And what do you hope that the people watching understand about farming?
Family and farming and food is what I love. It's easy to be passionate about something you love, and be aware of what you're eating, and know that there's farmers producing that crop and producing specifically peanuts that are proud of what we're growing. And we want to provide something that's nutritious, sustainable, and healthy.
Okay, so Chef Mai, this has been on the stove here for about 25 or so minutes. Tell me what the next steps are now.
Your favorite part, right?
That's what we're talking about.
Going to put peanuts in, right? And like I said, I don't like to put in too early because it becomes the same color. It's just a matter of preference, and it's sort of a chef thing. This is now done, so I'm going to transfer it now to a plate pot so that we can continue to simmer it if we like. It's a great vessel to also to heat up food, right? Because the clay pot stays hot for a lot longer. You want to garnish?
Yes, please, sure.
A little. See, this is very special cilantro. They're flowering, and they're much more intense. You want to put chilies in there?
I'm going to trust you with that. I'm going to stick to what I do.
See, a little lime, not too much, brightens everything. Okay, so how about tasting some food?
I've been waiting for you to ask me.
Right. Okay, here you go, and I gave you a little chilies because you like it spicy.
That looks great.
Oh my goodness.
That is delicious.
Wow.
You probably need some rice, right?
Wow. Mason, Mai, thank you both. We learned that peanuts inspire many cuisines, are a zero waste crop, and sustainably grown and farmed right here in America. Thanks for watching Peanuts in the Plant Forward Kitchen. I'm Ashton Pelham. See you next time. And oh, Mason, let's be honest, can I grow peanuts at home?
Ashton, I'm glad you asked, man, because I always encourage people to try grow peanuts themselves. This is important. As long as it's not a roasted peanut, it'll grow. So take an unroasted green peanut, put it in good soil, and add some water and keep it moist. And in 4 to 5 months, you're going to have your own peanut crop.
Awesome. You heard it from the man yourself.
Bonseo are crispy and savory crepes made with rice flour that are a popular street food in southern Vietnam. Bonseo literally means sizzling pancake in Vietnamese and refers to the sizzling sound when the rice batter is poured onto the hot skillet. The crepes are stuffed with all sorts of ingredients such as pork, prawns, mung beans, and bean sprouts. Today I'm going to show you a vegetarian version and stuff the crepes with mushrooms, bean sprouts, and tofu. Let's get started by making our batter, which you can make the day before if you want. In a mixing bowl, we'll combine our dry ingredients: rice flour, cornstarch, salt, sugar, and turmeric. Mix together coconut milk, water, and green onions until the batter has a smooth and thin consistency. Set this aside while we make our filling. Heat oil in a non-stick sauté pan over medium heat. Add sliced Nasoya tofu baked teriyaki and sear on both sides until golden brown, about 4 to 5 minutes. Add more oil and sauté the onions and mushrooms for 1 to 2 minutes until they're slightly browned. Now we'll make our crepes, which always need to be made to order for the best texture. Heat oil in a non-stick sauté pan over medium-high heat. Ladle about 1/4 cup of the batter into the pan, tilting it to spread the batter evenly. The batter should bubble on contact. Reduce the heat to medium and add a portion of the sautéed tofu, mushrooms, and onions, as well as some of the bean sprouts onto one side of the crepe. Sprinkle with some green onions. Cover the pan with a lid and cook for 2 to 3 minutes until the edge is crisp and the batter sets. Once the crepe is done, allow it to cook uncovered for an additional 1 to 2 minutes until the bottom is golden brown and crispy. Gently fold the crepe in half like an omelet and slide it onto a plate. Bonseo are traditionally enjoyed by wrapping a bite-sized piece of the crepe inside some lettuce with mint, Thai basil, and cilantro. This perfect bite is then dipped into nuoc chum. Not only are bonseo gluten-free and plant-forward, they are a fun and delicious shared dish.
I'm Brandon Collins, Corporate Executive Chef for Unilever Food Solutions North America. And today, we're going to make a salsa macha utilizing bone marrow. In Oaxaca, they utilize everything, right? So why not use bone marrow? It's absolutely delicious as our fat agent when making our salsa macha. We're also gonna be using some special chili peppers, like Pasilla, Oaxaca, which comes from an amazing region in Oaxaca itself, above the clouds, on the side of a mountain. And they smoke all of these amazing pasilla chilies. It's the only way you can get the pasilla Oaxaca, unless you want to get it fresh by going up into the villages, which is also a really, really cool thing. And then with that salsa macha, we're gonna make a purslane salad with some seasonal vegetables. Again, purslane is very, very prevalent in Oaxaca, and it's something that I think we should use more of here in the US. So salsa macha is similar to a chili crisp if you've ever had that. It is different chili peppers. There's some shallots, garlic, different seasonings, a bunch of fat, whether it's oil or bone marrow in this case. There's usually peanuts, pepitas, something along that line. But for this recipe, we've kept those out in order just to be able to curtail some of the allergens. So here we have the guajillo chili. You'll notice that it's super smooth with a thinner skin. It's very, very malleable, right? So that's going to add this sort of level of sweetness and earthiness to it. Every chili serves its purpose. Here's the pasilla. So the pasilla is a little bit more like crinkled. It's not nearly as malleable, but it is definitely still malleable. And this is going to add a level of heat. And if you're using the pasilla Oaxaca, it's going to add a level of smokiness too. So if you're able to get your hands on the pasilla Oaxaca, please do. Here we have some crispy shallots. These are just shallots that have been cooked in oil until they get nice and crispy. You could also buy a crispy shallot as well to utilize. We have the bone marrow as well. We're going to season this with some caldo de pollo from Nor. We have dark brown sugar. We have oregano or Mexican oregano as well. Mexican oregano has a very distinct flavor profile. So if you can get your hands on it, use that. Some apple cider vinegar, some whole cumin seeds. You could easily use cumin powder if you couldn't get your hands on whole cumin seeds, but they're pretty prevalent. And then about 20 garlic cloves, because everything is better with garlic. First thing that we're going to do is we are going to open up our tub of caldo de pollo. And we're going to actually use this as our seasoning, right? We're going to break it up a little bit, and we're going to sprinkle this right over the top of the bone marrow. Now, the bone marrow has been soaked in water to get all of those impurities out, to get all of that, all the blood and anything that might be in there. So we soaked it for 2 days. You usually only have to soak it for 1. And then here we're just going to season this, get all of that absolute flavor, and then we're going to pop this right in a 350-degree oven for around 12 to 15 minutes, basically until all of that bone marrow sort of melts down and you get all of that beautiful fat. All right, so while the bones are roasting and getting all of that beautiful bone marrow and marrow fat, we're going to toast our chilies. So our chilies have been seeded with the tops removed, and we're gonna throw these in a warm pan, right? So normally in Oaxaca, they would do this on the comal, which is that beautiful clay cooking vessel that is usually outside and it's fired with wood. But what we want to do is we want to wake these chilies up, right? We want to pull those oils out of there and kind of wake them up a little bit. So I have been warming up my pan. I'm going to actually turn it up a little bit, and we're going to kind of push them down so that way we can make sure that they're evenly toasting. They're also going to soften them up a little bit as well. So we want to push them down, make sure that everything is sort of toasting. And you'll notice that they will start to shine a little bit, and some of those colors will start to change. We don't want to burn them, but we also don't want to not toast them really well. So we're going to get them nice and warmed up and beautiful. Be careful to put your head in there, though. It'll be a little ripe. It's going to be very spicy. Okay, now those colors have almost changed completely. And they're nice and soft. We're going to pull these out. These are our pasilla chilies. And if we were using pasilla Oaxaca, we would get that nice smokiness. And now we're going to add our guajillos in there. Exact same treatment, right? Stemmed and seeded. And these are the same thing. We want to get those evenly toasted. One of the things with guajillo is that they're red, so they'll start to actually change color a little bit. So they're a little bit easier to tell whenever they're done versus the pasilla. But you see how they're starting to get shiny in there? It's letting you know that this is working. And then once these get toasted, we're going to put a little bit of oil in the bottom, and we're going to cook off our 20 garlic cloves. Get that beautiful color change. Beautiful. We're going to turn this heat down a little bit. Going to add some oil. Throw our garlic in there. We really just want to soften this garlic up. If it gets a little bit of color on it, that's fine too. But what we're trying to do is make it so that we're not only flavoring this bit of oil that's going to help our bone marrow as well, but it's also going to make this garlic nice and tender. Right, we're going to kill the flame and just kind of work this through. All right. All right, so we've toasted our chilies off. We've let them cool down a little bit before we throw them in here. But now we're just going to throw them right in the Robocoup, and we're going to use the Robocoup to help chop them up. A lot easier than trying to do it by hand. Keep turning it on and off so that way it'll settle. And again, you don't need it to be super even. Some different shapes and sizes is perfectly fine. All right, so our bone marrow is ready to come out. We've gotten this beautiful level of fat. We still have some of the marrow in there as well. So we're gonna set that down. We're gonna let it cool down for a quick second, and we're gonna add everything else into our chilies. So our chilies have been chopped. Wash your hands, please. Never fun to find out that you forgot to do that. And it's usually burns. So we have our beautiful crispy shallots. We have our cumin seeds, or cumin seeds. We have our Mexican oregano, and then our dark brown sugar that we're gonna put in there as well. And while this is hot, right, we wanna make sure that we put this in. And we're also gonna have that hot oil from our garlic, right, that we did earlier. So we're gonna control this. Try not to hurt yourself, right? Dump as much of that fat into there as you can. Give it a quick little stir. All right, we're going to use this to kind of rehydrate those chilies as well. Break up that brown sugar if you can. We're going to take that hot garlic oil, right, from the garlic that we were doing earlier. Dump that right in. These beautiful pieces of garlic. All that gorgeous flavored oil as well. Stir this up. We are also going to start taking all of this marrow that's left inside these bones, right? We don't want to lose anything. We want to use all of this flavor, but the bones are hot. So make sure you grab them with a towel or your tongs. Scrape that right in. You could very easily do this with canola oil if you wanted, or avocado oil. You don't have to use the bone marrow, but the bone marrow adds such a cool flavor, adds a meatiness to it as well, that is hard to miss. Remember, it's got that nor caldo de pollo on there as well, so it's gonna have all of that amazing seasoning and flavor. Make sure you get all of that off of the bone as well. And the smell of the guajillo chilies and everything is absolutely amazing as it comes up through. It has that sweetness, that spiciness, those caramelized onions as well, that garlic. Stir this up in there too. Again, try to get as much of this fat as you can, humanly possible, right? Last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add our apple cider vinegar right in. And it's done. We're just going to let this set. Letting it set overnight is perfect, but it'll hold for quite a while for you. And then we're going to use this to dress a beautiful seasonal vegetable salad. All right, so we've got our salsa matcha. It sat overnight. We then reheated it, right, because you want to make sure that it's not solidified. And now we're going to make our salad. So we're going to start with these beautiful squash blossoms that we got from the garden. We're going to remove the bottom. We're going to remove the little stamen in the middle. We're just going to tear them into pieces, right? Again, squash blossoms are pretty prevalent all over Oaxaca. So we're going to make sure that we do this. Just tear them apart. No perfect world, no perfect size. Just making sure that you get rid of that stamen. Then we're going to use our purslane. So purslane is a weed. I mean, we step over it every day. It grows in the cracks of the sidewalks. It grows in the woods. So it's utilized quite often in Oaxaca. So we're going to use that. We have some beautiful chayote squash. This is very crispy. It has kind of like an apple-y flavor. We're going to one whole chayote in there. Raw corn. We've used the rest of this sweet corn for other recipes, but for this, we're just going to put raw corn kernels in here. I like the raw because it adds a beautiful crunch. You could use roasted corn. You could use whatever you would like. Then we have these beautiful patty pan squashes that have been cut into quarters and just roasted in the oven with a little bit of oil and a little bit of the nor caldo de pollo. And now we're going to use our beautiful salsa matcha with its oil, with that vinegar, right? It's basically a vinaigrette. Now it's all going to be based on how much heat you can handle, right? If you want it super spicy, add a ton of this. If you don't want it super spicy, just sort of add some of the chilies and the onion and the garlic, and then use the rest of the oil to help coat the salad. I'm gonna go all in on this. This is a lot of greens. This is a lot of different vegetables. There's a beautiful amount of sweetness too that you're gonna get from the sweet corn. That should be good. We're gonna toss it. Let's toss this. Let's see what we got. You wanna make sure that everything is nice and coated, that you can see all the different colors and the textures. I wanted to make sure that all of these textures were different, the shapes were different, so that visually you get this stunning sort of look as you're looking at everything. In my opinion, you can never have too much. Right, so everything is tossed and coated, and now we're gonna plate it. We're gonna top it with some of these beautiful flowers. Again, we're just gonna put this right on the plate. You're gonna get enough for about 4 or 5 salads out of this recipe, right? So you don't have to overdo the plating. Unless you want extra, feel free. Maybe one more little scoop, make sure we get some of that corn extra chayote in there. And then, feel free to just kind of let these fall naturally. You could also add them into the salad yourself if you wanted, but they tend to be delicate, so I like to put them on the top. And there you go. There's a purslane salad with bone marrow salsa matcha and seasonal vegetables.
This dessert was my introduction to the luxurious flavors of rose and pistachio when I was a young child. My mother's favorite restaurant in New York served a similar dessert, and when it arrived at the table in its silver-rimmed glass cup, I always felt like a princess. It's refreshing, creamy, silky, and it has the intoxicating aroma of roses. There are so many variations of this dessert around Europe. Malebi in Cyprus, Rojata in Croatia, and panna cotta alla rosa in Italy. I was inspired to deconstruct this dessert and make my own updated version using products from all over Europe in a new elevated milk pudding with rose. The base of my pudding is a full cream milk powder from the Netherlands, which is a dairy product created by removing water from whole milk. I'll reconstitute it for my pudding. Instead of using sugar, I'm sweetening the pudding with Romanian fig preserves. I love the pop of texture from the fig seeds. I'm also adding French acacia blossom honey, which has subtle hints of vanilla and floral fruity notes. So that my pudding sets, I'm adding some potato starch from Poland mixed with water. I'll thicken the milk pudding using traditional mastica de chio, also known as mastica. Mastic is a natural resin from Greece harvested from the bark of a shrub found growing throughout the Mediterranean. What makes it so special is its PDO or Protected Designation of Origin status, meaning it can only be produced in the island of Chiu, where centuries of know-how give it its unique character and quality. Not only does it add the perfect texture to my pudding, it also imparts pine and citrus flavors, a very emblematic flavor of the region. I set my pudding in the rose mold to remind our guests of the rose ingredients in the pudding, as well as to show the transition of spring flowers into summer fruits. In Croatia, this dish would traditionally be served with rose cordial poured over it in a bowl with some ice cubes, while in other regions it would be served with figs cooked in honey. I'm creating green leaf shapes using Pistachio Verde di Bronte cream, made with high-quality pistachios from the Bronte region in Sicily. To impart rose flavor and aroma into my dish, I'm adding rosehip jam from Croatia. A lot of people don't think of rose as a flavor, yet roses have had a place in our kitchens for eons. They were enjoyed in sweets in ancient Greece, the Byzantine Empire, and all over medieval Europe. Lastly, to echo the honey in the pudding, I'm garnishing my dish with some honey bee pollen called Miel de Asturias from Spain. It adds a textural contrast as well as a slightly sweet and floral flavor with some undertones of nuttiness and earthiness. In addition, it's very healthy for you. This milk pudding with rose is light, refreshing, and a perfect summer night treat. It celebrates the fresh seasonal ingredients and highlights a harmonious blend of floral and nutty flavors.